All right. Welcome, everyone. I'm going to take just a quick moment while everyone joins the room here with us. Welcome to our, what is this, Doc? The fifth, the sixth academic skills webinar that we've hosted this year?
I've lost count.
Yeah, something like that. We're excited that you're here. Welcome, everyone. I see we've got Carol, David, two Davids. Hi, David. Denise, Evelyn, Felix, Gabriella, Gisela. Did I say that right? Isabel, Itzel, Jean, Kelly, Kimberly, Marcella, Marcy, Maricel, Rachel, Rosa, Rosemary, Ryan, Shannon, Timothy. Wow, this is great. We're excited that you're all here. We don't want to delay too much because we have quite a bit to cover. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Timothy, welcome. We tonight are going to be, this webinar is on the basics of APA style. I am Micah Palpant. I am a student success manager and an adjunct professor here at LAPU. And with me is my esteemed colleague, Robert Doc Waltz. Dr. Waltz.
Hi, everybody.
We refer to him affectionately as Doc.
Yes, we do.
Internally and his students as well. So, and Doc has lots more experience than I in APA, but we both have worked with this for quite some time, even as students ourselves. So we want you to be familiar with it because it is how LAPU operates in every class. This is the formatting style for every paper that you write. And we want you to be familiar with it. We want you to be comfortable with it. And so we're going to be going over the basics tonight. Okay.
And that's a good point, Micah. Guys, Micah and I were students. So we just didn't take a class or pay somebody to teach us how to operate and navigate through APA. We learned by being users of it and being academic writers and students. So actually, we are one of you in that we're not walking encyclopedias. We still kind of struggle and have to check our own notes and references in the manual and the online virtual sources as well. But honestly, we're just like you guys, figuring it out as we go along. We just maybe a little bit further down the road than you guys are.
Yeah, that's a good point, Doc. We some of the suggestions we'll even be offering in here tonight are things that we've learned ourselves.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, I'm going to jump into a couple of housekeeping things here. We have closed captions available. So if a transcript is helpful for you to read along, you can turn that on at the bottom of your screen. You should see a little CC button that you can click, and you can enable captions at the bottom, closed captions at the bottom, or you can open up a full transcript on the side. So if that would be helpful to you, please do so. I also just posted that if that's helpful for you to see in the chat as well. All right. We want this to be an interactive webinar. So Doc and I are going to be going back and forth, interacting together. But if you have questions, there's a Q&A, there's a chat. We will be monitoring that. I'll be monitoring that. And if it's something upcoming, we'll probably not answer it right in that moment if we anticipate that we're going to be answering it coming up. But if that question is relevant to right where we are, we'll try and answer that live. And then at the end, we'll leave a few minutes as well for follow-up questions as well. So we'll hang out and spend some time with you, have any questions that were not answered in our presentation to that point. All right, let me give a quick overview of where we're going tonight. First, we're going to give an introduction. What is APA? Where does it come from? And talk about basic formatting for the entire paper. And then we're going to go through a paper from front to back, from start to finish. The title page, moving into the abstract, if that's relevant for your paper, how to use headings, in-text citations in the body of your paper, what it means to synthesize your sources as you're writing. And then we get to the end, your reference list and any tables and figures that might be included. And at the end, we'll conclude by reviewing some resources that we'll mention along the way that hopefully will be helpful with you. So let's dive in. We've got 34 people here. Hopefully we'll have some more people join us along the way, but we are glad you are with us tonight. Okay, let's get started. Doc, start us off here.
Okay, so as Micah said, this is going to be an introduction and an overview. It's going to be exactly that. We're going to cover many, if not all, of the main areas and rules of APA that you LAPU students encounter in writing your papers. We're going to identify other resources that will provide deeper dives for you, but that is not to discount or in any way take away from the valuable information you're going to get here. So why is APA important? Well, that's a great question, and I'm glad you guys asked. APA, for lack of a better word, is a style guide, okay? And in academic writing, we have to have some sort of a guide for writing our papers. So APA as a style guide provides uniformity and consistency for writing, for formatting, organizing, citing, referencing our sources, the stuff that we go research, find, and then put into our papers. So it encourages us, APA encourages us as writers to recognize the benefits of a conscientious approach to writing. That's it in a nutshell. Next slide.
All right. APA resources, this comes in from the American Psychological Association, and they publish the APA manual. 7th edition is the latest version, and you'll see the image of the book on the side here, the publication manual of the American Psychological Association. This contains in it all the details. Now, it can be really helpful to have this in your library, but it's a book, it costs to purchase, and it is not 100% necessary. There are other resources that you can use. You'll see those listed at the bottom here. There is the APA style blog or APA style guide at apastyle.apa.org, where people have submitted questions, and you can even search on there for whatever you're trying to find for examples. And then one that we use a lot here at LAPU, Doc and I both use this a lot, is the Purdue University Online Writing Lab, or OWL, Purdue OWL is the acronym. And they have a thorough, detailed walkthrough of APA, both writing out what the formatting is and then demonstrating examples of everything that we will be talking about tonight, and probably even more detail than what we will be talking about. So those are great resources for you to bookmark, to have in your toolbox to refer back to, because they can help answer fundamental questions about APA. Now, what does APA regulate? So this book or these guides, what are they for? They help guide your writing style, how you approach the way that you communicate in your paper. They guide your in-text citations when you are referring to sources to back up your points, to demonstrate the research, how you acknowledge that in your paper. There's a specific way to do that. So that you're doing it honestly and so that your reader understands what it is you are referring to. And then at the end of your paper, there's the references. So anything that you acknowledged in your paper, you will list that at the end of your paper in a reference. And there's a specific way to provide that information at the end to help your reader be able to maybe go look for that information themselves. Often a great place to do research is in the reference page of a research article that you're looking, because if that's interesting to you, then you go look at their references and you go find their resources, and that helps further inform what you are researching. So it's a great tool to use, but there's a specific way to do it, and we'll be talking about that tonight. Language in APA should be clear, concise, and plain. Clear meaning specific in descriptions and explanations, not elaborate. This isn't literature. Concise, you want it to be condensed. You're not going to be verbose in your explanations. Not the way that I describe it here in a webinar, but plain and simple. Keep it simple. And then you don't use figurative language. Don't use metaphors. You use simple descriptive language, just an adjective. You minimize your elaborations.
Yeah, no colloquialisms. Oral communication, verbal communication, as we're presenting right now, Micah and me, that is not the way you want to write your papers. You want to be concise. You want to use plain academic, straightforward language, minimize figurative kinds of phrases.
Figures of speech.
And the main takeaway of this slide, guys, is keep it simple. That's why you see it twice.
Yep. Doc, you can continue here.
Okay. So when I was working on my master's thesis and my doctoral dissertation a billion years ago, we students were instructed to write in the third person. Well, as we've all found, as we've scrubbed the 7th edition of APA, and this might even go back to the 6th, I'm not really sure. We've transitioned from referring to ourselves as objective or third parties as first person personal. So it is okay for you to refer yourself as I found this. It is my opinion. It is my observation, as opposed to referring to yourself as the researcher or the author. So you see a blue check there. We conducted an experiment. I conducted an experiment. That's the proper way to refer to yourself in writing an APA now. You see again, and if you're a student of mine, you've seen this in my classes, keep it simple. You want to keep it simple, direct, concise, clear, plain. So I've got an example here that I use with my students in my classes. Jones, and the date that Jones was published, found that dogs are smarter than cats. That's the right way to write and use the grammar for that finding. This is not the right way to do it. I found an article written by Thomas Jones in the journal Animal Intelligence that dogs are smarter than cats, 2022. 90% of that stuff is inappropriate for APA. So again, guys, 3 or 4 more times after this, I promise, keep it simple. Author, date, and what that author found. When we get into some slides down the road a little bit here, you're going to see that if we quote, we're going to add where we found that page, paragraph, section, whatever. Keep it simple. Author, year, and then whatever that finding is.
Thanks, Doc. Okay, basic paper formatting. Should be assumed that it's typed. We're online students, so you're submitting online papers. They should be typed out. They should be double spaced. APA expects everything to be double spaced. Your title page, your abstract, the content of your paper, your reference page, double spaced.
Not double space.
Not double space, just double space, simply double space. We'll refer to that again later. Should have 1-inch margins all the way around. And you should use a standard font like Times New Roman. We recommend 12 point, but APA says 10 or 12 point. 12 point is usually a little easier for readability on a paper. And most papers expect word count, not page numbers. You're not going to see write 3 pages. You're going to see write 1,000 words. And that way, it doesn't matter what your margins are. It doesn't matter what your font size is, but this is the standard here. When you're writing a paper, your paragraphs should be indented. The first line of a paragraph should be indented 1/2 inch. That's usually just the tab. When you hit the tab button, when you're starting a sentence, that should move it over 1/2 inch, but 1/2 inch is standard. And your paragraphs should be relative to the size of a paper. If this is a 2-page paper, you're going to have shorter paragraphs. Usually think in the realm of, it's not a paragraph unless there's at least 3 sentences there, usually 3 to 5, and a paragraph is communicating a point. So don't try and communicate too much in a paragraph. It's fine to separate them each time you're making a new point as you're moving through your argument or what it is you're talking about.
Yeah, good point. Paragraphs help organize and synthesize your content. So if you are in the habit of not creating paragraphs, you need to start getting into that habit, because it will provide that clarity and that conciseness and that plain delivery of your content that we talked about earlier.
Okay. Paper elements should also include a page number in the upper right-hand corner. You can see in the example here, we're on page 5 of this, this paper that we're writing. APA 6 and prior required a running header, which you'll see in this example, which was in all caps, abbreviated version of the title. In APA 7, running headers are not required in student papers. So if you include a running header, that's fine. If you were familiar with APA 6, or you just in your study of APA, you include it, that's fine. You're not going to be penalized for it, but you also don't, it is not required. That's a new change. And that's frankly, that's nice to have one thing removed from what we have to put together in a paper.
Ryan asked if paragraphs need to be indented. The answer, Ryan, is yes. Great question.
Yeah, each paragraph is indented.
Each paragraph is not left justified, and there's no double space or a double and a half space between paragraphs. Everything is double spaced. Paragraphs are indented. And again, as Mike has shared with you, that's just punching the tab key once.
Yep. Kimberly, you anticipate where we're going, but just about to answer your question. Thanks for asking. So let's get into a paper. We start with the title page. A title page is relatively simple. It does include a page number. You'll see on this example here, title page is page number 1, which is nice. You don't have to make title pages different than the rest of the paper. You establish the title, the page number. It's usually a setting in your word processing software, whether you're using Google Docs or Microsoft Word or Mac Pages. You can usually just insert page number in the header in the upper right-hand corner, and it will just add that to every single page. Now, the content of your title page is relatively simple. It's centered, both centered, the text is centered from left to right. It's also usually about centered in the middle of the paper, maybe just a little bit above the halfway mark as you see it here. You start with your title of your paper in bold, and then you'll include your name, the author, your school, so Los Angeles Pacific University, the course that you are in, your professor's name, and the due date of the assignment. You'll see those 6 items here on this example. Title, author's name, you, the school, Los Angeles Pacific University, your course, the professor, and the due date of the assignment.
We had a couple of questions that I saw. I'll try to answer them. I'm not sure what we were talking about, but the page number is to the right, as Micah is showing there. And then Felix asked, does it have to be centered? Felix, I don't know if you're talking about the actual content of the title page. If you are, the answer is yes. As you see there, all of the content of the title page is centered. The page number, there is a page number shown clearly on the title page. Start with page 1, and it is in the upper right margin.
Gene, you don't say by, you don't need to say by, just put your name there. So it's just title, then your name.
Felix, paragraphs are not centered. They're left justified and you indent on the top line.
It's not, you can include doctor if your professor is a doctor. It's also fine to just include the professor. You could just say, Professor Waltz would also be perfectly fine. Just to acknowledge who your professor is. Professor Palpin, Professor Waltz.
Don't do both. Don't go Dr. Smith, PhD.
Yeah. Also know if your professor is or not. Doc is a doctor. So you would refer to, if you did that, it would be Dr. Waltz. Don't assume if your professor is not. I am not a doctor, so you wouldn't put Dr. Palpin. If you don't know, play it safe and just put professor. Usually that's in the professor's bio. You'll be able to find that. But if you don't know, just say professor. That's the safest.
Yeah. And also how we prefer to be called. I prefer doc. If any of my students that are online tonight, that I prefer doc. Jose asked, said it's impossible to memorize this. Don't worry about that, Jose. We're recording it. It's going to be readily available.
All right, Doc is going to talk to us about abstracts here.
Very briefly, am I going to talk about abstracts? Not every paper requires one. So if it does, here's an example. You'll see that it has a bold heading at the top. It's center justified. And then the actual content is blocked. There are no indentations for abstracts. Everything is left justified. And what it does is summarize, provide a high-level view, summary of the actual content. Most abstracts are going to be kept to one page. And if you're thinking in terms of word content, that's going to translate to about 150 to 250 words. The general default number of words per page is 250. So there you go.
Doc, you're going to continue here.
Headings is my topic. I love to talk about headings. I said earlier, guys, that headings help to organize and synthesize your content. Most LAPU courses contain a signature written assignment, and you do it in parts. Most signature assignments are going to be 3 or 4 incremental parts. So that translates to maybe 10, 12, 15 pages of content. You want to organize and synthesize that as best as you can to keep that concise, clear, plain approach to academic writing. So we indent, create paragraphs, but we also have headings. Headings are divided into 5 levels or tiers, and these next few slides are going to walk us through that. So the primary or tier 1, level 1 heading is center justified and bold. And you see that on this slide. Thank you, Micah, for going to this one. That is a level 1. That's a primary heading. In many instances, particularly with signature assignments or longer papers that are quite intricate and detailed, you've got to go to a second or maybe third tier or level heading, again, to maintain that organization and synthesis of your content. So a level 2 heading, as you see here, it's titled Measures, it's left justified, and it's bold. What that means is under the level 1 heading Methods, I have a subset or a subtopic. It's related to methods, but it's focused on measures. So that gets a level 2 or tier 2 assignment, left justified, capitalized, bold. If I have a subset underneath that, and here in this slide, you see that we do, it's titled Exercise. It's left justified, it's italicized, and it's bold as well. There's a level 4, which is 1 tab in. It's standard font, it's bold, and it has a period after it. So what that means, I'll do the level 5 as well. Yoga class, italicized, bold, with a period after it. Focus on that yoga class level 5. What that tells us is that yoga class and everything underneath that is related to group exercise, which is related to exercise, which is related to measures. That's how it works. So you can readily see from these levels or tiers of headings how we can appropriately organize and synthesize our content. And again, to keep it simple, to keep it clear, concise, and plain.
Let me try and translate that to an assignment here, because often you're going to have an assignment prompt in a class, and you might have on page, so you got your title page, page 1, page 2, either would be an abstract if it's a long research paper, or if it's not, you probably wouldn't even include an abstract. And then you'll have page 2 or page 3, where you start the body of the paper. At the top, you'd have the title, and then you may have some bullet points that you have to address in the paper. If short papers, you may not even go past level 2, and each bullet point would be your level 2 subheading. In a medium-sized paper, maybe a 4 to 5 page, you might go to level 3. It's unlikely in that length of a paper that you're ever going to need to go into a level 4 or a level 5. Think a book that is outlining a research study. A book is going to, in a chapter, they might go down into level 5. Even some of your textbooks, you might notice, organize in this way. An academic research paper that you're writing unlikely is going to go down to a level 4 or level 5. So it helps you understand, even understanding your headings here can help you understand what you're reading and how the author is organizing the what you are reading in your text.
Yeah, most of you are going to use level 1 and level 2 and sometimes a level 3. The Bachelor of Science in Organizational Leadership program has a research project, which is quite extensive. It covers 3 courses. The Master of Arts in Organizational Leadership has a capstone project, which is a rather extensive paper as well. So in those 2 programs that I teach, I can tell you that you might get into level 3, 4, and 5, but for the most part, you're going to stay level 1, level 2, and occasionally perhaps level 3.
Okay, now we're going to move into the body of the paper. This is your main content. And the key here with APA is how you work with in-text citations. So I'm going to talk through some of the basics, and then Doc is going to take over and talk through some specifics and provide some specific examples. In each of these, we're going to try and demonstrate examples. So first, we're going to talk about the difference between parenthetical and narrative citations. And the examples here are both paraphrases, just so that you can follow along. A paraphrase is when you put in your own words what the author is saying, as if you're reading it in your text, and then you put that book down, not looking at how they said it, and you write it your own way. Here's what this author says. Now, a parenthetical is you fully say it in your own words. You don't even acknowledge the author or the publication. And our first example is that falsely balanced new coverage can distort the public's perception of expert consensus on an issue. You got that from a source, but you don't acknowledge that source. So in the parentheses at the end, that's where you give the acknowledgement. That was from Kohler in his 2016, his or her 2016 work. That's a parenthetical. The citation is in the parentheses. The second example is a narrative format, where in your narration, in the content, the body of your paper, you acknowledge the source. And that's our second example at the bottom. Kohler noted the dangers of falsely balanced new, oops, sorry. I can't read the bottom line. What's the bottom line there, Doc?
Kohler 2016, in parens, noted the dangers of falsely balanced new coverage.
There we go.
It's the exact same paraphrasing. It's just formatted and presented differently.
You acknowledge Kohler in the text, and then as soon as you say who it is, you put in the date there so that the reader knows this is the 2016 work by Kohler that we'll be able to match with on the reference page. So if I want to know, maybe you have 2 works by Kohler. So this was the 2016. You go look on the reference page. This is Kohler. Oh, there we go. Kohler's 2016 work.
And see how simple that is too. Again, keep it simple. We're paraphrasing here. So all we need to do is identify the author or authors and the year of the publication, and then the rest of it is in our own words.
Now, if you're referring to something specific in your source, meaning you have to pull exactly that thing out, or maybe they say it so perfectly, you just couldn't imagine saying it any better, or you really want the reader to read exactly what the author said here, that would be a direct citation or a quotation of your source. And so we're talking about quotations. If you're pulling from a very specific detail in your text, now we need to add the page number. Mm-hmm. So if you are using exactly the words of your author, you need to, in your citation, include the page number. And we're going to talk about narrative and parenthetical citations again. So building on that. So the parenthetical citation in our resource, Jones, our author, just makes this statement: dogs are smarter than cats. That's not my words. That is Jones's words. So we put it in quotations, And here in our parentheses, we don't acknowledge Jones in the body, so we include it in the parenthetical citation. Jones from Jones's 2021 writing on page 123. You just add that extra detail, P dot and the page number, page 123. In the narrative citation, we're going to acknowledge Jones in our text. So Jones reported, quote, dogs are smarter than cats. So just like our last example, Jones, which work? The 2021 work, reported, quote, dogs are smarter than cats. Where was that? In parentheses at the end, page 123. And then the period. This is a little detail. Note where the period falls after the citation. The citation is part of that sentence because you need that included to tell you that quote in this sentence is from here, period. Now we move on.
That is a great point, guys, and I hope that everybody was paying attention. Punctuation is very, very important in writing academically. So be advised that there's no period after the word cats. The period is at the end of that sentence because that is actually the entire passage for this citation. The closed paren after the number 3, that's where the punctuation goes. It's a period. And then a brand new sentence with a capital word begins after that. That's a common error that I find with my students.
Now, we're going to drill in a little further onto narrative citations. We've given some examples. Jones said, according to Reynolds, if you can get into a rhythm, and unfortunately, when you get into a rhythm Jones said, Reynolds said, Smith said, it can get dull for you as the writer, though you may get into a good rhythm and you've got your formatting right, then it gets dull to the reader as well. And so as you grow in your capacity to navigate APA, you want to change it up a little bit. Use narrative citations and use parenthetical citations. And when you use narrative, mix up the arrangement. According to Reynolds, in Reynolds 2019, quote, blah, 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 on page 3, period. Or maybe you say next time, Reynolds also argued in the 2019, quote, blah, 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 blah. And then we look at the Smith work, and Smith stated, here's some other examples, stated, acknowledged, Smith stated, and Jones acknowledged in their work that such and such and such. So mix up your language. That helps keep it interesting to your reader. If you rearrange, if you use the different examples.
It also exemplifies the fact that you are in charge of this paper. You actually are intelligently and intentionally presenting your findings to your reader. That you're putting some care, some intentionality into it, some thought, okay? So we've given you some commonly used signal phrases or verbs here. So as Micah said, work on becoming comfortable with using other words besides said or stated or reported.
All right, Doc is going to get into some specifics here with citations.
There are 3 categories, if you will, or levels of presenting a source. The first is paraphrasing, the second is short quotes, and the third is block citations. We're going to walk you through each one. The first, the most preferred method is to put it into your own words. And you've already seen a slide from Micah on how we do that. Here's an example parenthetically, and then one from a narrative perspective. And again, in very brief review, in a parenthetical citation, we don't give credit to the author or the source until the very end. And we do that in parentheses. That's why we call it parenthetical. And all of that you see in front of, in parentheses, Berryman et al. 2018 are our words. You know, the student wrote that. Those are my words as the writer of this paper, and I'm paraphrasing it, hence they're my words, and this is the source that I found it in parentheses, hence parenthetical. In the narrative, it's the same paraphrase, it's my words, I'm just presenting it to my reader, in this case, my professor, differently. I'm narrating it. So Berryman et al. In parens 2018, and then there's the paraphrase. Try to become comfortable in using both, because as Micah said on the previous slide, if we get into this rote or mode of just doing it all the same way, it becomes boring for us as the writers, the students, and it becomes boring for the faculty, the professors who are going to read this. Next slide. Okay, so this is the second preferred method of presenting a source, and we call it short quotes or short quotations. And these are 39 words or less, and you really don't want to be pushing to that 39. You want to be down in the 7 or 8, 9, 10, maybe 15 words. So again, we've got a parenthetical example and a narrative example. As scientific knowledge advances, comma, then in quote is the short quotation, end quote. Notice that there's no period at the end of that quotation. We don't put the punctuation there. Then we open a parenthesis. We give the author's last name. Author doesn't get his first name or second initial or anything like that. Author's first name, comma, the year that it was published, comma, lowercase p period space, and then the page number that it was found. The abbreviation for a page is lowercase p period, not lowercase pg period, not lowercase page. It's p period, space, and then the page that it was found. Close the paren, and there's your punctuation with your period. In the narrative style, see that we introduce the author's last name first, Hong, not Joe Hong, not Jill Hong. Authors get their last name only. Hong in parens, the date that Hong was published, stated. There's our signal phrase or our action verb. Stated, quote, the application, there's our quote. Close the quote, and then in parens, the page that it was found. Lowercase p period 503, close the paren, punctuate with the period. I saw a note, but I didn't catch it. Micah?
I was answering questions in the chat, just
Okay.
about the use of punctuation.
Okay, great. Next slide. Okay, 2 or more works, in-text citation with 2 or more works. Again, we're going to keep it simple. I told you I was going to hit you with that phrase a lot, and I'm a man of my word. Keep it simple. Here's an example. Dogs are smarter than cats. Parenthetically, open the paren, author's last name, comma, 2018, the year that Adams was published. We separate those 2 sources with a semicolon. The second source is Collins. Collins gets his or her last name only, comma, and then the date that Collins was published, 2017. Close the paren, punctuate with the period. Dogs are smarter than cats. Where did I find that? Well, I found it in Adams, who was published in 2018, and I also found it in Collins, who was published in 2017. When we are citing 2 authors in our paper, in the actual text of content, there's a unique rule for how we couple the authors with the word and. When we are in the narrative citation mode, as you see with this example, according to Smith and Jones, we spell out the word and. It's bolded here just for emphasis. You're not going to want to bold it. So according to Smith and Jones, and then in parentheses, the year that Smith and Jones was published, comma, quote, dogs are smarter than cats. And then at the end, in parentheses, is the page that we found it. Again, lowercase p period. It was found on page 96. Close that paren and punctuate with the period. When we are using the parenthetical citation, we don't spell the word and out. We use the symbol, the ampersand, and you see that in bold here. Again, for emphasis, we don't actually bold that symbol. So this example reads properly: when examining canine and feline intelligence levels, comma, quote, dogs are smarter than cats. It's the exact same quote that you saw up above in the narrative citation, but this time we give the parenthetical citation Smith, ampersand or symbol for and, Jones, comma, 2018, comma, lowercase p period, 96, close paren, punctuate with period. If redundancy is our friend, go back to that slide, Micah, real quick. Redundancy is our friend. What I mean by that is if we are continuing citing a source, we've got to let our reader know that we're still citing that source. So look at this bottom example. According to Smith and Jones, 2018, dogs are smarter than cats, in quote, in parens, page 96. Cats understand, now here's another quote. Cats understand, quote, approximately 15% of spoken words, dogs understand, end quote. We got to give Smith and Jones credit once again, even though we just did in the sentence right above that. So well, I just did that. The reader needs to know that you're still in Smith and Jones. You're still citing Smith and Jones. So we give Smith and Jones credit again. This time we're doing it at the end. So we have in parentheses Smith and the symbol for and, the ampersand, Jones, comma, 2018. And we found this quote on page 97, lowercase p period 97, close the paren, punctuate with the period. Thanks, Micah. Three or more authors. This is a new rule for the 7th edition of APA. In the 7th edition of APA, the very first time we cite a source that has 3 or more authors, we must use the et al feature. Et al stands for and others. So only the first author listed gets his or her name, just the first name. In this example, it's Lynn, L-I-N. And then all of the other authors in the citation are credited with the et al verbiage. So in this example, Lynn et al and others, published in 2019, examined how weather conditions affect the popularity of bike sharing programs. Okay, another example, one study looked at how weather conditions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is parenthetically, so at the end, in parentheses, Lynn et al, period, comma, year of publication, 2019, close the paren, punctuate with the period. That's a new rule. So if you have a source that has 3 or more authors, we're using the et al the very first time we cite that source. So we've looked at paraphrasing, which is summarizing in our own words. We've looked at short quotations, which is 39 words or less, but you heard me say we want to keep that to as short as possible. Don't push that 39-word limit. The third and least preferred, and some faculty members won't allow it at all on a short paper. They're going to want you to paraphrase or, worst case, offer some short quotations. is the block citation or block quote rule. When we go to the next slide, you're going to see what it looks like. It's named this because it's actually blocked. We indent the whole citation in one tab so that it's indented and left justified, not all the way over to the left margin, but indented and then squared up or blocked. And it has some strange and unique punctuation requirements. And so thank you, Micah. Here it is. So you see, looking at this, how it's blocked, it's left justified, but not all the way over to the left margin. It's indented one tab and then blocked on that left side. So it kind of stands out on its own. 40 words or more. Now go to that second to last line, the word underpinning. So I want to draw your attention there because this is where students commonly make a mistake. You see that period there? That's correct. The period goes there. And after that, we actually parenthetically put the authors and the year of the publication and the page that it was found on. We close the paren, but what? We don't punctuate with the period. It's just kind of left hanging there and it looks weird, doesn't it? But that's the way APA wants it. And again, it's their world, we just live in it. So we abide by this, this rule for block citations. One last thing, notice that there's no quotation marks. A block citation does not get quotation marks. It does not get a period at the end. It gets that period at the actual end of the quote, which is contradictory to what we've just learned. And then hanging out there parenthetically is the author or the authors, the year of the publication, lowercase p period, the page that it was found, close the paren, and we don't punctuate because we already punctuated with that period prior to the parenthetical source.
This one's an anomaly from
Yeah.
all the examples that we've shown, but that's because it is blocked. So by its very nature, it is set apart to draw your attention to it so that you know, if I'm looking at a block here, this is a quote, and I don't need to include the citation because I'm not moving on in this same, it's not a, we're not in a paragraph that we're going to move on here. So the citation still stands with this and it doesn't need quotes because it's already blocked in there. The rest of the examples we've looked at within text citations are buried in the body of your text. And so you have to be real careful to make sure all of that content is noted while you're navigating and reading through the body of your paper. Otherwise, if you miss the quotations or if the period is in the wrong place when you're reading through the body of a paper with a short quotation, then you're going to lose track of, wait, where does this citation go? And wait, what's the author's words versus your words? So that's why this one is different. It doesn't need as much of that tidying up and holding it together because it all is intentionally set to stand out like this.
Timothy asked, when would you use this? Timothy, great question. You would use it when you cannot paraphrase. It is so important that you don't want to put it in your own words. You don't want to break it up in short quotations. You want it to stand on its own because it's so significant that it must stand on its own. Those are rare requirements. That's why many professors won't allow them, or if they do, it's because it's got to meet that high standard.
There's very few. Oh, go ahead.
We probably need to speed up just a little bit so that we can get into references.
Yeah, there's few reasons why a block quote would be needed in an academic paper. Most short papers, it's going to eat up too much space. And it's going to be viewed like you're not creating original, you're not putting in original content, or you're not processing it yourself if you're just using a big chunk of the author's words. So it may be in a long research paper and it may be a graduate paper or a research study that you conduct on your own, you might use a block quote like this.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, so very quickly, not all sources are going to have authors. They're going to come from organizations or websites or whatever. So the way we use that, again, parenthetically or from a narrative citation methodology, is to just identify the organization. In this case, it's the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA. So for the narrative, we would say, according to the Food and Drug Administration, and then in parens, we would say FDA. Then we would have the actual content. And then at the end, the year that the FDA published this. If we are doing a parenthetical citation, we would have the content, and then parenthetically at the end, Food and Drug Administration, then with little block brackets, FDA, comma, 2019, close the paren and punctuate. In many virtual sources, we will find that there's no page number. So APA gives us options when our source is not paginated. The most typical will be paragraph, P-A-R-A, period. And then you just count paragraphs, 1, 2, 3, 4. I found this on paragraph 4, P-A-R-A, period 4. Or section. Sometimes there's no discernible paragraphs. It's just blocked. And then you scroll down and you're on the next page and there's more block stuff. And APA gives us a little bit of latitude here. And we faculty must give that latitude to you guys as well, that you did the best you could. There's no page number, so you can't put page 123. There's no discernible paragraphs, so you can't count 1, 2, 3, 4. So you count sections. Section 1, I'm going to call this section 1, this section 2, this section 3. I found this in section 3. So SEC period 3, and you're done. And you're not going to be, called out for plagiarism because you did the best you could to precisely indicate where you found that passage. If there is a heading or a title to a section, then as you can see with these other examples, you can put like, quote, health benefits section. I found this under the heading health benefits. So I'm calling that the health benefits section. You want to do what you can to give your reader a clear pathway to that precise place in that source that you found that citation. Next slide.
We're on no page numbers here.
Oh, sorry. I didn't see you advance that. Okay. So again, this is another way of kind of saying the same thing, but this is the narrative citation in that we have clearly identified the author and the year and the section or the location, if you will, the paragraph, the location, the section that this source was found. So on the previous slide, it was parenthetical citation. On this slide, it's narrative citation. So very briefly, Johnson, that's our author, not Joe Johnson, not Jill Johnson, Johnson. In parens, 2019 health benefits of kale section. Again, that's me as the writer giving my reader my best take on where I found this, and then the quote that it was that I am extracting from my content. Okay. Synthesizing your sources. We already talked about organizing and synthesizing and how important paragraphs and headings are. I want to give an example of what synthesizing your sources looks like. So Micah, if you could go to the next slide. I said a few slides back, redundancy is your friend. Commit that to memory. And if you're a student of mine, you've already seen that from me in class. In this, and I don't like reading slides, but this slide needs to be read. So I'm going to read, you please read silently while I read aloud, and I'll be able to clearly show you what I mean by synthesizing your sources. Jones, 2001, again, not first name, not middle initial, last name of the author. Jones, 2001, tested several cats and dogs and reported that dogs are smarter. Smith, 2004, using Jones, 2001 as a baseline, expanded on the variety and nature of testing and sampled dogs and cats in 14 countries, including the United States. Smith, 2004, found that dogs generally demonstrate 76 more intelligence than cats. You can clearly see how redundancy is my friend, because I provided a pathway of clear, concise, plain grammar explanation of where I came to this position. I started with Jones, 2001, Smith, 2004, and wherever I referred to that particular study, I didn't say this study, I didn't say he, I didn't say her, I didn't say the author. Again, I was redundant in that I identified the author and the year of the publication. Going into the second paragraph. However, Jackson, 2010, replicated both Jones, 2001, and Smith, 2004, redundancy is my friend, and found that while dogs tested higher than cats, dogs generally recorded 52% higher scores internationally and 83% higher scores domestically in the United States. Jackson, 2010, concluded, there's one of my signal phrases or my action verbs. Jackson, 2010, concluded, quote, emphatically and without any doubt, dogs are smarter than cats, etc., 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 close quote, page 123, lowercase p for page, close the paren, period. This is a great example of synthesizing the content, the research that I found, putting as much of it into my own words by paraphrasing, short quotations, identifying each source, even though it appears to be redundant, so that there's clear, concise, plain language presentation to my reader.
Thank you, Doc. That was amazing. That was a lot of detail, but we are now through the body of the paper. We're at the end of our paper. This is your reference list. The reference list includes every source that you cited in your paper. They should be the same. If it's in your paper, it needs to be on the reference list. If it's on the reference list, you should have used it in your paper. Those two things need to match. If it's on your reference list and not in your paper, it shouldn't be on your reference list. And if it's in your paper, but not on your reference list, that's a problem.
That's a major APA error.
Yep. So you want those two things to match. Anytime you cite something in there, keep your reference list. Sometimes it's to your advantage to even put your reference list together before you write your paper. So you have a list of all your sources, and then anytime you refer to it in the paper, then you already have the citation details, and you can include that.
If you cite, stop, go to your reference list, put it in there. Even if it's not APA compliant yet, at least capture it there. Hey,
Yep.
I cited Smith here. I got to go to my reference list and put Smith 2021 in there. You always come back. That at least saves you, that you don't drop, a source. Now, this is where it gets a little bit nuanced. We've talked about, where the I'm losing my words right now. The quotations, the parentheses, the punctuation, where all that goes. On a reference list, it's very specific as to why it's this way. APA defined it. It's creating a standard. We don't have good explanation for why it's exactly that way. It's just what they've defined as their standard. So we use the phrase, it's their world, we live in it. We follow it because that's what APA 7 demonstrates. So here's some examples. We've got a book is our first, the Griffin text is a book. The second one is a journal article that we found online. The third is a journal article that we found in the library or some physical resource. We're going to talk through these in a moment here, but you'll notice each of them contains the same content. There is the author, then the date, then the title, and then where you can find it. A couple of common mistakes on reference pages. When it comes to the author's name, in the body of our paper, we always just use the author's last name. Smith, Jones, Reynolds, you refer to them by their last name. You don't use first names. You never use full first names, but on a reference page, you give them the initials if you know them. The first initial for sure, maybe a middle initial if you have it. Never anything more than that. It is a common mistake to write out the full names. That may be
consistent in MLA, or that's more literary writing, maybe something you're familiar with from high school. In APA, academic writing, just initials.
And no title, no title.
And no titles.
Put doctor, you don't put PhD,
Yep.
you don't put EDD, last name and initials. That's it.
Yep. Thanks, Doc. And then in the title, you only capitalize the first letter of the heading or the title and the subtitle. So we have an example here, the perfectly formatted paper, that's the title of the article, and the subtitle is how this paper, how this should be done in your essay. Note that the only letters capitalized there is the T at the, and the H at how. Now, of course, you'll capitalize if it's proper. So if you say how perfectly formatted paper, the perfectly formatted paper at Los Angeles Pacific University. Now that's proper. So Los Angeles Pacific University would also be capitalized. But any other non-proper words in the title that are not the first word would all be lowercase. Okay, here's what we were talking about earlier when we were looking at those first examples. A reference page citation at the end of your paper contains 4 elements. The author, that's where we start, and that is what is alphabetized by when you put together a reference page. The author, the first element, the first letter of that reference line entry. So we start with the author, then we give the date, then the title, either the title of the book or the title of the article, and then where you can find it. If it's a book, where you can find it is the publisher. If it is a journal article, where you can find it is the journal and the volume and the edition. And then if it's from an online source, of course, you'll add the URL for that. Here is an example of a reference page. The top of it has a heading. This is a heading like we talked about earlier in the heading section. So you bold, center your references page, and then you start down the left side. Now, citations, just like the rest, or the reference page, just like the rest of your paper, is double spaced. No double space. You put an extra space between citations. The tab, or what we call the hanging indent, helps distinguish when you switch from source to source. So no double spacing, just a simple double space. Citations start at the left margin. So you can see when you have the author's last name or the organization that published it, as in our second, the second and the third example, starts at the left margin, the 1-inch margin, and then everything subsequent in that citation is tabbed in a 1/2 inch. That's exactly the inverse of a paragraph. A paragraph tabs in a 1/2 inch the first line, and everything else sits at the left margin. A reference page citation is what's called a hanging indent, where the top line is at the margin and everything beneath it is tabbed in a 1/2 inch. And then I mentioned your reference list will always be alphabetized, either by the first author's last name or the name of the first word in the name of the organization, as you can see here. Doc, you want to take this?
Yeah. The best strategy for learning APA is to just start using it, okay? Don't avoid APA compliance because you think it's too hard. Micah knew absolutely nothing about APA until he started writing in it.
Correct.
I knew absolutely nothing about APA until I started writing in it. And honestly, it scared me to death when I was in my undergrad studies as a working adult, married with kids, writing papers that I hadn't written this way in years, translated as a couple of decades. And now I got to write to APA. Oh my gosh, what was I thinking? So just break through those barriers and those obstacles and start writing in APA. Ask yourself, is this a book? Is it a scholarly journal? Is it a website? What is it? And then we have resources to help you write in that APA compliance that you're being graded on. You don't want to give points back to us professors for avoiding APA. So we've got in-course resources, we've got the library, and you've got us. We are here. We want you to succeed. We want you to graduate. We're not here to make your lives miserable. So utilize these resources that are readily available to you. Check a textbook, check a journal. Google Scholar has improved so tremendously over the past 5-7 years. I don't recommend that you get a hard copy of the APA manual, but you can if you want. But those other resources, the APA style resource and the Purdue OWL. I use the Purdue OWL when I can't figure it out on my own and a student asks me a question that comes out of left field. I go, oh my gosh, I don't know how to do that. I go to the Purdue OWL. And then wherever you go to find that resource and find that example, then you just mirror that. One last thing on this slide. If you're using auto-formatting tools to format your citation or your source into a reference, beware. I have yet to find an auto-formatting tool that is 100% accurate. You can utilize its functionality to bring it over to your paper, but you are not done. You must then check it for accuracy. Did that transfer over 100% accurately? Chances are very good that it did not. So look for those errors. The most common errors that I find with students who use an auto-formatting tool to take it from the source and transfer it to their paper is capitalization. If a whole title of a source is capitalized, that's an obvious error. So you've got to look for errors once you bring it over. It's kind of a good news, bad news. The good news is I can bring this information over as opposed to typing it out. But once I bring it over, I've got to scrub it and make sure it's 100% accurate.
These auto formatting tools, often you'll encounter them if you're using the online library, but you should be using LAPU's online library. It's a great resource to find a scholarly articles, books that you can use in papers and assignments, but they'll usually have a auto formatting citation. You pick APA citation, you grab it, it'll copy it, and you can paste it onto your reference page, but don't trust that it's perfect. And usually they're not. Another one is what we reference. The common mistakes is the capitalization or authors' names. I've seen them where they auto format and they put in the full author's first name, and you need to know, oh, I have to abbreviate that. I've got to take that out and just make it the initials.
Or it gives you a left justified reference. Mm-hmm. You've got to do that hanging indentation or hanging margin, but that's the least one. Yep. Okay, tables and figures. This is mine. Go ahead to the next slide, Micah. Tables, I've given you an example here. Let me get to that page on my screen. They're basically 4 components for citing or clearly presenting a table. The first one is identification of the table. Table 1, table 2, table 3, capitalize the word table. Below that, in italicized, is going to be the actual title of that table. In this case, top 3 NBA season leaders 2019. Then the actual title. And then new for 7th edition of APA is just the source. In this case, it's a URL or it's a link to a website. Notice that we don't put retrieved from and the date. We just put the URL or the link that was found. So 4 components. Table 1, identifying the table as table 1, sequentially. Table 2, table 3, table 4. In italics, identifying the table, giving it a name, the actual table itself, and then the source that it came from. Next slide. It's going to be figures. Similar. Figure 1, figure 2, figure 3, sequentially. In italics, give it an identification or a name. Then the actual figure itself and a citation below that. I don't know that you can see this here. It can be in the form of a note, but it can also be the URL. I wish that we could make this a little clearer for you, but you get the point in that the it still has the 4 components: figure, 1, 2, 3 sequentially, the title or name or identifier of the figure is in italics, the figure itself, and then the source that you got it. I'll repeat this one last time. The retrieved from and the date is no longer required for references or for citations, figures, and tables.
Doc, a quick question for you. Do you have to include table and image citations on the reference page?
That is a good question. And the answer, I think, is yes, because it's actually a source.
Yep.
So yeah, you would want to include that in your list of references.
Yep. It would be just like any other reference. You would include whatever source you found it from. You'd have the author, the year it was published, the title, and then where to find it.
Yeah, I've never gotten that question. That is a good question. And because it's a source, and we have this hard rule: if we cite, we must reference. If we reference, we must cite. Since we are technically citing this figure or this table, then yes, it must be included in our references. The only exception to that is religious works such as the Bible. You know, that has a unique rule. Again, it's their world, we just live in it, where we can say Genesis chapter 1 verse 3, but we don't list the Bible in references. Why? I don't know. It's because it's their world and we just live in it.
When we had some, I'm so glad that you brought that up, Doc, because we actually had some conversation. I was conversing in the chat about that, where you will include that in an in-text citation with the Bible, includes in the parentheses, you would include the translation. So like NIV, comma, and then you put Genesis 1, verse, Genesis book 1, 3, and then end parentheses.
Yes.
And that's the same with any holy book, all holy books, no matter the religion.
Right. Now, if it's a book like business according to the book, or business according to the Bible, or books like that are written by lay people, or maybe pastors that come from a scriptural perspective, those you will cite and reference because they're not religious or holy books.
Thanks, Doc. All right, we made it, everyone. Thank you for sticking with us. I know that this can get tedious. It's technical. We're not expecting, and no professor is expecting, that you have this memorized and be able to quote it back to us what we're talking about. What we are trying to do is provide examples, talk it through so that you can see it. And when you write, you practice it. But the key is find resources to help you. Purdue OWL, we referenced at the beginning, is a great resource. I've been using it in the chat today. Doc has mentioned it multiple times. We use it personally as well as, and so we highly recommend it for you. The APA style website, the style guide, the style blog, you can use that as well. LAPU has an APA help section in your course website. So at the top header of any page that you're on when you're in your classroom, there's a little helps menu. You can click on that, and on there is an APA helps. There's another recorded webinar. This one is being recorded, and your success coach will be able to point you back to it if you would like to rewatch it to review any of these details here. But there's also some materials. There's a template in there. And in fact, I think the two most helpful things, Doc and I were talking about it earlier today, is there is a Google Docs APA template and a Microsoft Word APA template. If you go to the helps menu at the top, in the top bar of the course website, LAPU course website, click APA resources and scroll all the way to the bottom, and there will be two links to an APA template for Google Docs and for Microsoft Word. It's basic, but it sets up the template for your title page, the body of your paper, and the reference page. It just gets it started, and that will help. You can use that for every paper that you use. Save that and use that. Keep some examples for yourself. I would often, when I was in college and grad school, when I was writing a paper, I would look back at my most recent paper because I'm assuming that I'm getting better each time I'm doing it and I'm fixing things. So I would look back at my most recent paper and I would mimic myself. How did I do a book? How did I do a journal article? If you are in a class and you anticipate using your textbook, for example, in discussion forums, probably every week, keep on a document your reference citation, figure out it once correctly, and then you've got it for yours. Make it easy for yourself. You've got it there. You can just copy and paste it because you know you got it right once, and you can use exactly that in every discussion, in every paper where you reference that same source. So it's you don't have to have it memorized, but help yourself out by bookmarking websites and keeping documents where you've figured it out so that you can mimic that in the future. Any final words, Doc?
No, that was it. That was great. I think
All right.
let's leave it right there.
All right, then we are going to end the recording. Thank you all for joining us. I hope that this was super helpful.